The opening sequence of episode 33, much like the remainder of this arc as a whole, gives us absolutely no room to breathe and drops us right into the climax of the fight. Right away, Bertolt's Titan comes crashing down on top of Reiner and Eren, its body erupting into a massive steam cloud shaking the walls to their very core, simultaneously scalding and forcing the scouts away. I think this is also further evidence that the disappearing act we saw in Trust is very much a plot hole, as even with the all-out steam explosion he does here, as well as the fact that he really has no reason to stick around after he falls down, his bones are still left behind, just like they should considering the bones are the only part of their body that they cannot burn away. And that's not even mentioning that the Trost steam explosion didn't burn Eren, who was less than a meter from his body. This one caught people at least 25 meters away. They were halfway up the wall. I mentioned it briefly last time, but him retaining his form atop the wall was meant to draw attention away from Reiner, so there, he obviously wouldn't want to disappear. But in this case, using the last of his mass to decisively blow everyone as far away as possible seems like the far smarter decision, which is exactly what he does, but still, bones are left behind. So yes, exactly like I said way back in Trost, I do think it is a very, very rare, but a plot hole nonetheless. Titan shenanigans aside though, we hear this eerie and almost horror-like music as both Eren and Ymir are captured, immediately planting us not only in a place of uncertainty, but also very, very explicit loss. This is no longer the reveal of Reiner and Bertolt. This isn't a fight against them. We lost. Eren, someone who in every single mission thus far was the single most important person, is captured by the same people who started this all. And so naturally, I think the dominant emotion here isn't actually anger or rage, but rather fear. At this point, we have lost, we know that for an absolute fact, and we have no idea where they're going. The person who was meant to be the hope for humanity, well, he's gone. As for the title of the episode, Hunters, I think this one has a couple of pretty straightforward interpretations. First off, I think it could refer to Reiner and Burrito, who have very explicitly hunted down Eren and now have made off with their prey to who knows where. But secondly, much like we saw throughout Season 1, I think there is also a very solid case to be made that this is referring to the Scouts. In many ways, this is the very first time when we know we are going after Titans. This is no longer some sneaky mission laid out by Erwin where we have certain suspects, like we saw with Annie for example. No, now we have two names. We are hunting down Reiner and Bertolt. Those are our two enemies. Moving into the episode itself, much like with the reveal of Reiner and Bertolt a few episodes prior, we aren't just yet given a follow-up as to where they are. Rather, we cut to Pixis, who is sleeping atop the wall, and importantly, we don't yet know when this is taking place. As of right now, we know that Eren has been defeated, and that is it. Naturally, you expect some level of urgency, right? But just like with the reveal of Reiner and Bertolt, well, the series keeps you wanting. And while Pixis was always far more open-minded when it comes to the Titan threats from within, I don't think it's a stretch to say that him being woken up here, just as the news of what happened is broken, might also be a subtle way of showing how he, along with the rest of their core, are now waking up to the truth of enemies walking among them, with even the MPs now being deployed all over the streets. It is of course a reaction to the Annie incident, but I think from a narrative sense, they are very much waking up to the truths of the world, especially with what's to follow with the royal government arc. Though Pixis then says that if they hadn't seen any trouble, Hannes' squad should be returning any moment now, which one, reminds us that Hannes did definitely run into trouble, and two, reminds us of what this entire mission was about in the first place. Don't forget that Season 2 starts with the question of why are there Titans within the wall when there is no breach? Season 2 is just kinda hijacked by our two Titan buddies. Originally, it was all about the monkey and Ragako, right? Though we then see Erwin arrive, with Pixis and him exchanging a few words about how they have caught a rat, but that they were still a step behind. The simple interpretation here is that they were a step behind because Annie still transformed and they had to take her by force, with her eventually just hardening and them just not getting any intel whatsoever. But I think another way of looking at it is the intel he received about the links between Annie, Reiner, and Bertolt. Keep in mind that the first person who got that intel was Erwin. So in other words, they were a step behind because even when they thought they got the rats, turns out that there are potentially two more, ones which, unbeknownst to them, have already transformed. So again, it all links back to the female Titan mission and then keeping the rest of their squad isolated after we captured Annie. Much like Erwin feared all along, we got the rats, but there are just more of them. We then cut to the MPs, who are all giggling amongst themselves, saying that we never saw any Titans, yada yada, only for Levi to apologize, saying that they go on expeditions all the time, saying they are more than welcome to join them. Much like with the Annie capture mission, I think all of these extra scenes of the MPs being entirely ignorant of what's going on are just there to remind us of where they stand in this entire conflict. In Season 2 thus far, we have barely seen any of them, so in a meta sense, I think it's just a practicality of reminding us of where they stand. Though in story, it of course also sets up their huge turn in Season 3. Even now, we've already gone from the MPs never leaving the inner walls to them already being on the front lines. Well, in Season 3, they'd be fighting right alongside the scouts to the point that their regiments no longer really matter, and it is all about fighting for humanity as a whole. Just like we saw with Pixis, we are now awake and we know of the threat within. The following arcs are all about forcing us to come together to figure out the truths of the world and eventually fight the greater threat that sent in those traitors to begin with. Though we then see Phil and Sasha arrive, with them catching up Pixis and Erwin on everything that has happened. First off, they just say that there is no breach whatsoever. We've heard this line repeated like a dozen times from a dozen different characters. So much like the rest of the season, it just continues to ask that question of how. There is of course some information asymmetry between us and the characters in-universe, as we've already seen Z control Titans. But still, jumping to the conclusion that he can create them at this point in time is a huge leap. Though in-universe, we'd of course also be getting just a few more hints with Amir very soon. Though secondly, he knows that they ran into the 104th Corps, that being Eren's squad, and then saying all of them were missing their gear and 3 among them transformed. This is another one of those times where you have to take a step back from the story itself and realize that the author is trying to tell you something with all of this dialogue. Someone sat down and wrote that line choosing very specific words. Why would you say they were lacking their gear? Why is that detail important? Well, because it is important. Just like we've been talking about ever since the female Titan mission, him specifying that they were all missing their gear and it's the same squad that also had Titans within, immediately tips you off that Erwin expected this. Much like has already been alluded to with the flashback we got a few episodes prior, it's no coincidence that those suspected of having Titans were also stripped of all their gear. And also note that Erwin is not the least bit shaken. Much of that is of course just Erwin being Erwin. I don't think there's a single thing in this world that can shake this guy. But I think much of this also just comes down to the fact that this isn't really that big of a surprise. Rather, he immediately jumps to the question of, tell me exactly what happened. He was attempting to bait out the Colossal and Armored in Season 1 already after all. To a certain extent, this was the goal all along. Well, minus Eren being there, and most certainly minus Eren being captured, of course. This also finally gives us a point in time where all of this is actually happening, and also reminds us that it takes time for information to travel. We might be 8 episodes deep into the season, but it's barely been a couple of days since Annie's capture, and unfortunately, we don't have a funny goofy WhatsApp group to send messages to Erwin. By the time Sasha and Phil arrive, the fight is long over and they've lost. This whole aspect of how information travels is used a lot throughout, especially with things like the Annie capturing mission and isolating Eren's squad. All of that is hingent on the information asymmetry between us as the viewers and the characters in-universe. With everything that will transpire next, and especially with Eren's founding Titan, just keep this in mind. And lastly, there is Jean in this entire situation, who is having a very bad day right now. Keep in mind that he was used as the Eren step-in, so unlike the rest of his squad, he has been present all throughout. But that has also now resulted in him being entirely in the dark about what's actually going on with the rest of his squad. So him receiving news that not 1, not 2, but 3 of them are shifters probably has him doing some serious reflection. Also, haha, funny goofy episode with a lot of horses is when Jean finally appears in the season. Get it? It's funny because he looks like a horse apparently. I don't know, it's funny goofy. Returning to Wall Rose though, we get a bit of a role reversal as we see Mikasa wake up with Armin by her side. But I think this one, deliberately paralleling what we usually see after each and every mission, is with the explicit goal of telling us that Eren's story has just changed. He now knows the true enemy, and far more importantly, in a mere few hours, he would awaken the Founder's power. So seeing Armin and Mikasa simply looking out at the vast distance between them and their lifelong friend Eren, I think very much tells us that things will never be the same. Unbeknownst to them, they have already lost him in more ways than one. And if you remember the whole scarf conversation we had at the end of Season 1 and Eren wanting her to get rid of it, well, wouldn't you know it, Mikasa also doesn't have it on right here. But okay, let's take a step back and let's rewind to where we actually are. Mikasa is still asleep. Hold this thought for now. And before we continue with our main trio, we jump on over to the mid-cards talking about the terribly exciting subject of crackers. It's this insanely complex recipe of, okay, I won't even try to come up with something funny goofy here. Like, yeah, it's just crackers. Apparently they're very nutritious though, so it's not like basic ones. I think even this is one of those more subtle things that make things like Nicolo's cooking in the final season carry so much more weight. And as with every name in the series, please bear with me here, I might call him Nicolo, I might call him Nicolo, it really depends on what I'm saying in the sentence, it'll be fine, don't worry about it. Much like Sasha's obsession with food that we eventually learn actually stems from her growing up quite poor, Nicolo, someone who's supposed to be the enemy, treating them to this incredibly nice food when all they're used to are these bland military rations, just subtly makes him far more endearing and caring. But of course, far more importantly in the context of the final season, it brings up the question of, do we have any enemies? What even is an enemy? If someone who's supposed to be on the other side and supposed to be this enemy is now cooking food for us, well, isn't that just a friend? But okay, I'm pulling a future Eren here, we'll leave that for the final season. As of right now, I think it's just a case of practicality. The scouts, by design, are meant to travel around a ton. So naturally, they need a lot of light and non-perishable food, and this is exactly that. Returning to the episode though, it's here where we get into the really fun stuff, because we drift into a flashback where Eren has gotten into trouble again, very clearly paralleling the situation he is in currently. Now, this is definitely me overanalyzing, but we see a blonde dude who's doing all the attacking, a shorter brown-haired dude is standing as support, and the longer, light-haired dude is sort of the passive one if you will. So could this be Reiner, Bertolt, and perhaps Annie respectively? The blonde one is doing all the fighting, just like Reiner. The other two, on the other hand, stand by as supports, i.e. Burrito being standoffish as usual, and Annie, well, she is captured. Alternatively, perhaps you could take the longer-haired one to be Ymir for basically the same reasons. He teases Eren and is sort of a part of the fight, but nowhere near as much as the blonde one and is not leading the charge. But okay, like I said, that is definitely a stretch. But wait, there's more. Because we do see Eren pretty decisively beat down the blonde one, only for the brown-haired dude to help him out. Almost as if to mirror exactly what we saw with Reiner and Burrito, huh? Not only that, these are also the same kids that we saw in episode 1. So I think mirroring this little trio who constantly clashed with Eren and his buddies in the good old days, with Reiner's trio who also clashed with Eren and his buddies, would further that question of who is the enemy? Obviously, I'm not likening this to breaching the wall, it's just kids doing kids things. But I do think it is a micro-scale example of how conflict still exists within the walls, and this constant "he is the enemy" isn't as simple as just a blanket statement that the other side is the true enemy. Even amongst ourselves, we still have enemies, we still have friends. So what if that is true for the quote-unquote other side as well? Almost as if Attack on Titan was trying to tell you that making blanket statements like quote-unquote the other side is first of all dehumanizing and second of all dumb. There is no such thing as the other side. All of them are individuals and clumping them together is just not helping anyone. Though speaking of this being just a funny goofy brawl, we see Hannes, just like we saw in the premiere, casually playing games with his buddies and just saying that let the kids do what they want. But of course, as a full-on brawl breaks out, he too decides to join in. I think all of this just juxtaposes the fights of the present day. Back then, this was their entire world. These petty little battles amongst themselves was all they knew. They thought this was a huge problem, they thought life was hard. But when looked at through the lens of the present day, where they are quite literally fighting for their lives, the whole thing seems almost peaceful in how meaningless it was. I mean, sure, they all got scruffed up and whatnot, but everyone involved knew everyone else, and none of it really mattered. So at this point, it's almost like we are longing for those days where we could just scuffle amongst ourselves. Even in a meta sense, I think the show goes out of its way to reframe these events as exactly like this whimsical thing. If you remember in episode 1, Armin was being bullied. It was super sad and very serious.
It's alright. Thank you. Okay.
Well, this entire brawl is nothing more than a joke. Sure, Eren is super serious and others around him are also kinda taking this seriously, but it's a joke. None of it really matters. Though the absolutely best part here are the last moments of this fight. We see Eren run off, leaving Mikasa and Armin just desperately calling out for him. I mean, here, I don't think I even need to overanalyze. Obviously, that's exactly what's being paralleled in the present-day story, with Armin and Mikasa just calling out to Eren, who has gotten himself into yet another pickle. And big surprise, in the long run, that is yet again exactly what we see, with Eren running off, eventually starting the rumbling, and having Mikasa and Armin yet again just trying to catch up to him. Even in the very latest preview we have, which is awesome by the way, Armin talks about how maybe he was born to race Eren and Mikasa to the tree, because, you know, he was. That is what he's meant to do. And then the song, Under the Tree, literally talks about Mikasa just wanting to be with Eren under said tree. It's just another reminder of what the story is. The tragic reality of them always trying to chase Eren but never catching up. He is always just barely out of reach. That's just what he and the Attack Titan does. It keeps moving forward no matter what. And as we return to the present day, all of those themes are just turned up to 11. Mikasa finally wakes up, being told that it's been 5 hours already. Naturally, she is angry, but also sad and confused all at the same time. Just asking, surely someone has gone after him. Though as is always the case with Armin, he tries comforting her by rationally explaining the situation. He says the others are injured, the horses are on the other side, basically saying, please don't blame anyone, no one has given up. We simply could not do anything, even if we wanted to. It's just a spin on the dynamic we saw back in Trost. There, it was Armin who blamed himself for losing Eren and being helpless. Mikasa, on the other hand, just tried being there for him just as much as she knew how, even though she herself was clearly in pain. And so here, Armin tries repaying that by offering her support the only way he knows how. He rationally breaks down the argument and explains why she shouldn't feel angry. I think it's just a really nice bit of realistic characterization, and how not everyone is the most empathetic person knowing exactly what to say to calm someone down. No, neither Mikasa nor Armin got super sappy with each other. Both of them just offered help in the best way they know how. Mikasa bluntly told him, now's not the time to get emotional, get up, we'll figure this out. Armin, on the other hand, takes the rational approach and tries explaining the situation. Though as their conversation continues, Mikasa gets a sudden headache. One that I think the show tries brushing off as, oh, she got a concussion, don't worry about it. But of course, we know that her headaches are a very core characteristic. I've talked at length about her headaches before, so I won't rehash that again. But the fact that it happens just as Eren slips away from her is of course just more fuel to the fire that are the many Ackerman and Mikasa theories. And it's here where I think Isayama just straight up says, you know what, I'll copy-paste the script from this episode to the ending, I'm sure no one will notice. Because, man, I'm not joking when I say you could copy-paste this conversation to Season 4, and it would fit flawlessly word for word. Just like I mentioned earlier, Mikasa finally grabs her scarf, immediately asking,
Why does he do it? Always leave.
Though Armin then says, yeah, Eren always raced ahead on his own, leaving us behind. I'm sure that's what Eren was always... meant to do. I mean, we sure we didn't mix up the scripts? Number one, remember the I was born just to chase Eren to that hill. So, you know, story goes kind of full circle. From them racing to that hill as kids, to them chasing after Eren in the present day, and eventually finding themselves kinda sorta caught up to Eren under the tree that are the paths. Thereby completing the loop with, big surprise, not the present day Eren, but the kid Eren waiting for them, again, just barely out of reach. And number two, quote unquote, that is what Eren was always meant to do. Well, yes, funny you mentioned that, because he's in a time loop, so funny choice of words, because he is indeed meant to do this. I mean, they even add this unnatural pause with the wind blowing in exactly as he says this. Though Mikasa then says, again, let us flip on over to the absolute banger that is Under the Tree. Why oh why don't you want to stay with me? To me, the rumbling has clearly always been Eren's theme, while Under the Tree is Mikasa's. And so this back and forth of the lyrics is kind of what I view as a wordless exchange between them as we get into their final arcs. But okay, I'm again pulling a future Eren here, so let's leave all that for when we actually get there. And yes, I would not be surprised if the final opening/ending is Armin's theme, by the way. That's the only one we're missing right now, and he's supposed to be the narrator of the story, so I think it makes sense. We then see Hange pop up, and with him too we see a couple of, albeit tragic, but beautiful scenes. First off, him showing up with a straight and somewhat defeated face, only to fake a smile before he approaches the clearly distraught Mikasa and Armin, is just so wholesome. But number 2, I think this weird, messed up family moment captures the bleakness of Attack on Titan so perfectly. The entire, almost fatalistic nature of the story, I think, is perfectly encompassed in this single conversation. Eren's loved ones simply sit all sharing stories about him, knowing that he is currently in danger, knowing that underneath that facade of stoicism and strength, he needs them. But they are completely and utterly helpless. They cannot mount a search for him, they cannot help him fight, they can't really do anything. And again, you can copy-paste this right on over to the Rumbling. Only there, Eren is both the person they are trying to chase, as well as the person they are trying to stop. Though Hannes then says that he has seen Eren get beat down countless times, but then adding, I've also never seen him stay down. In the dub, he even says that it's in his blood.
He gets right back up again. It's in his blood.
And if you embrace the it's in his bloodline, and of course you do because this is overanalyzing, it is quite literally in his blood because, again, he has the Attack Titan. He keeps moving forward, that is what he does. And to throw in yet another cheeky bit of foreshadowing, Hannes then says,
Those good old days were something else. Of course, if you ask Eren, he'd tell you they were an illusion.
The bird flying in freedom, combined with I miss those early days, combined with Eyewater playing in the background, man, is this one messed up beautiful scene. If I lose it all outside the wall and all that, I told you, you can copy-paste this to the final season and it works perfectly. And of course, all the foreshadowing aside, knowing how this arc ends, all the wholesome scenes of Hannes just trying to comfort them, clearly still feeling indescribable guilt over what happened in Shiganshina, just hits so much harder. I won't lie, I do think him popping up here and exchanging a few words with his 2 surrogate children is a wee bit emotionally manipulative because, you know, he perishes. But regardless, this entire sequence atop the wall, from Mikasa's awakening all the way to them chomping down in dedication and preparing to go after their boy, it is just all so beautifully written. I think that longing for those simpler days has, bar a few obvious examples, a nearly universal appeal. So naturally, combining that nostalgia with the very raw emotional damage of losing Eren, combined with the fact that we now know that this is the last time they'll be talking to Hannes, and even more so, knowing the fact that even after all of this, they are never truly together, I mean, yeah, this is a rough one. Oh yeah, and like complete side notes, don't you find it kind of a funny coincidence that Ymir and Eren are both taken? But there is also an Ymir that is a part of Eren, and when we catch up to Eren, he activates the Founder, but we lose Ymir, only to learn that Eren's power is actually the real Ymir. Yeah, I know it's a lot of Emirs, and honestly that might actually be a case of why she was killed off, but you know what I mean. Though we then see Erwin arrive, and I want to quickly address the question that I know has popped up a few times after we see them ride the horses atop the wall. That being, why don't they always do this and why are they doing this now? To me, the question was always one of practicality. First and foremost, raising the horses to the top of the wall is just downright insane. 50 meters is like a 20-story building. Unfortunately, they don't have lifts installed, so imagine the sheer manpower that's required to raise up a band of horses to the top of the wall. Secondly, the Trost gates are still plugged by a huge rock, so passage there is impossible by default. So our options are either to ride on the interior of the wall or raise the horses to the top. Obviously, we know they chose the latter, and to me, the question is once again of practicality, with Astoria even noting that it should have been the fastest way, implying that even with the time it would take to raise the horses up to the wall, the time saved from not having to go through the gates, then all the way across the interior, yada yada, still gives them a gold frame in reaching Armin and the others. Especially because we know that if Hange's squad got up the wall, they are obviously at a point in the wall where there are pulley systems, so we can also descend exactly where we need to. I guess there is also an argument to be made for safety, as in, even now that Reiner, Bertolt, and Ymir have transformed, we still can't say for certain that things have really calmed down, right? We as the viewers, of course, know this to be right on the money, with the old monkey man still stumbling around somewhere within the walls. So in that sense, riding atop the wall at least gives them a bit of a height advantage if something does appear out of the blue again. So TLDR, the reason why they don't always do this is because it is needlessly complicated in 99% of situations. This is just that 1%. Eren, the person we've been protecting this entire time, has been captured. Every single second is incredibly valuable at this point. But returning to the story, Historia also makes it very clear that so long as Ymir is in danger, she is going with them. but you know Attack on Titan is depressing, so we all know how that ends. Connie too then says that she has a point, saying that more than anything, he just wants to ask why. I think all of this just loops back to that denial and utter confusion we saw from Eren as Reiner and Bertolt revealed themselves. Even now, we don't know why they acted as our friends for literal years. We don't know why they suddenly revealed themselves now. We don't know why they saved us a dozen times. I mean, Reiner saved Connie literally yesterday. So naturally, the why is the only thing he wants to know. At this point, he's not yet even really angry at them because he just doesn't understand it. Conceptually, they are supposed to be our enemy, but why? Though Hange then casually cements their absolute GOAT status as they literally crawl up to Erwin to explain their thoughts on the matter. So the next time you say you're tired, remember Hange. Do you still have enough energy to crawl? Good, well then crawl. That is a mega chat right there. But here, we're basically just given a bit of a lore dump on the following mission, with Hange saying that even if they are going to Walmaria, they will need to rest and they will need a hiding spot from Pure Titans. All of which, of course, comes from their research with Eren and the many Pure Titans they've had before. Hange then also notes that they are likely waiting for the nighttime before they continue moving, which naturally means that technically speaking, we can still catch up. Though far more importantly, within Hange's explanation, they briefly mention, suppose they are going beyond Walmaria. Again, take a step back from the story and think about it from the author's perspective. The traders were among us. Do not laugh, it's not funny. But yes, they were right alongside us, right? Try to think about it super rationally. We know that Eren comes from Paradis and he can transform into a Titan. But for some reason, the characters don't yet focus on any sort of internal conspiracy for the simple reason of telling a cohesive narrative and not planting too many false promises for us as the viewer/reader. The funny thing is, in hindsight, we know for a fact that there is an entirely different internal conspiracy going on. But for the time being, Hange only mentions going beyond Walmaria, something that, as of right now, we are entirely clueless about. We don't know if there is anything beyond Walmaria. But these lines right here explicitly plant the idea in your mind that our true enemy lies far beyond the walls. Something that, in retrospect, we of course know to be 100% true. And naturally, this also brings up the question of, Reiner and Burrito got Eren and Ymir. Okay, but they somehow need to get to Marley, right? What is their plan? Well, remember that they've already seen Zeke. So they do have a reason to suspect that some sort of Marley unit has been deployed. AKA, they can get in contact with the rest of the units and potentially have a means of fleeing completely. Something we of course know for an absolute fact does eventually end up happening. Only like, not right now, but you know, later. But it does happen. And speaking of our Marley duo, before we get to them, it is time for me to take you within the paths because we need to go wandering through some memories that never appear in the show itself. I'm going to be honest with you, I have no idea where this thing originally comes from, but there is 7 minutes of unaired dialogue between Reiner and Bertolt before Eren wakes up posted right here on YouTube. For obvious reasons, I won't play it because it'll probably get me blasted, but I've linked it below if you want to listen to the entire thing. Though there are a number of really interesting lines in this one, with Reiner telling Bertolt that he has the most powerful abilities of all the Titans and he needs to stop waiting for his commands. Something that we've talked plenty about already, with him doubting himself even as Reiner was literally transforming. And this is kinda sorta addressed later in Season 3 when he does indeed step up for himself. But there are also a number of super depressing lines as we see the boundary between the soldier and warrior Reiner really blur, with his voice trembling as he talks about the friends that he just betrayed. Unlike his sudden 180s and snapping back and forth, here we see him talk as the warrior Reiner and from that perspective, but in the context of being a soldier. So many of these lines have this super odd and almost paradoxical sense of not knowing what exactly he even means. He talks about returning back home, but the next thing he says is how he feels bad about betraying his friends. It constantly has you asking, which side is he referring to? There's also a bit where they just reminisce about everything they've been through, asking whether they regret any of it. They also talk about fate and how this is what they're meant to do. In many ways, it's that same exact fatalistic bleakness we saw with Armin and Mikasa. There are many instances in here of Reiner being on the brink of tears as they talk about the friends they betrayed. Both of them are trying to rationalize why they're being labeled as traitors. For them, those relationships run so deep that they have almost forgotten Shiganshin and trust. None of this is really required material, as much of this is both said explicitly later on, as well as just sort of implied. But if you do have a spare, 5 to 7 minutes, I would give it a listen, as I think it's just a neat encapsulation of that dilemma they are both fighting right now. Warrior and soldier, right and wrong, duty and friendship, Marleyan and Eldian. All of these things are, at least to the extent of not spoiling everything, touched upon in this conversation. Though a smaller implication in all of this is that Reiner and Bertolt talk right next to Ymir and Eren as they're sleeping. On the face of it, I mean, both of them, clearly they're out cold, right? Eren's literally missing his arms, no shot he's waking up anytime soon. But at the same time, these are the dudes who were undercover for years. If they were trying to be sneaky, surely they wouldn't be talking to each other out in the open, right? So implicitly, I think it's just another showcase of how much trust there still is between them. It is absolutely dumb. Yes, they might be leaking secrets, but it is also human. Returning to the episode though, we finally see Eren wake up, and oh boy, the musical transitions we see here are just beautiful. As Eren wakes up, it's this uncertain, somewhat tense beat. Him clearly just trying to retrace his steps and figure out, how did I even get here? But as Reiner greets him, there is this sharp transition as we cut back to the scouts who are now launching an all-out assault for them.
You're awake. Welcome back.
I think it's just a really cool juxtaposition of both sides here. An entire army of hunters is getting ready to charge at them at full intensity. Reiner and Burrito, on the other hand, with their prey still in their grasp, are calmly chilling in the trees. I think it perfectly encompasses the overwhelming power that the duo wields even now. Keep in mind that they will be caught off guard, but they still got out even without having Bertolt transform. Which, by the way, this is a complete side note. If you remember those absolutely awesome shots from the Season 2 opening with the Colossal tossing rocks and stuff at them, I distinctly remember there were people who were quite salty we never got to see anything like that, but you know, it is what it is. But yes, with that, the battle lines have been drawn very clearly, so now it's just a matter of time until they finally begin their clash. Much like the previous episode, my voice is entirely gone. I originally thought this would be a double episode video, but there is just a ton of character-centric stuff in this one, and now that we're dealing with the fallout of the whole Reiner Burrito betrayal, maybe that's not entirely surprising. But anyway, next time we'll be catching up on what the weird, quote-unquote, monkey creature is up to, and of course talking plenty about the complete collapse of Reiner's mind as Eren just tries getting some answers. So, I hope to see you back as we continue overanalyzing Attack on Titan. And that's the video. Another long boy, but my Attack Titan tells me the next one may be the longest video in the series yet. Again. But anyway, with that, I want to say a massive thank you to our current patrons and YouTube members who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. And let's also give a warm welcome to the newest member of the team, Saeed Ugurlu. I am sorry if I butchered the name, I definitely did. But without you, there'll be a whole lot less of my ramblings, so seriously, thank you. And for our patrons and YouTube members following along with my Berserk read-along, I have just reached the eclipse, so yeah. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching, I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!